When offered the opportunity to help out in the church, in the community, I accepted an offer that Steve gave me to join or lead a conversation about our community. Steve asked me to facilitate the conversation on shared values with content and structure that Steve provided. And I point this out because I'm new in the community and Steve is not. So I want you to know that what I'm talking about has not been prepared by somebody who hasn't been around for very long. It's Steve's content that I'm presenting. Facilitate is an interesting word. I am a facilitator. He asked me to be a facilitator in this role. Facilitate's an interesting word. To me, it means putting some subjects on the table for you to think about and for you to talk about, to help organize and to manage the flow, whatever that flow is of conversation. I don't want to do most of the talking. That would be very boring. I hope you will talk as well and share your thoughts, because everybody here is interested in understanding all of our thoughts about all of the words that we're going to be talking about. So, what is the subject? The subject is interdependence, one of the 6 descriptive shared values. The lived experience of this community has not changed, but still words are important, and we should talk about them. Today we'll talk about one of the new shared UU values, interdependence. The value interdependence is the topic in today's worship service, religious education, youth religious education services, and this workshop. We'll take a deep dive into the words and meaning of the description and covenant that goes along with the word interdependence. This will be an interactive discussion, I hope, please, that I will facilitate. We want to make sure that anyone who speaks has a microphone in front of them, so if you feel comfortable moving and walking to a mic, please feel free to do so, and if you don't, please just raise your hand and the mic will come to you. So, let's get going. The wording for the independence value consists of 3 parts. The word, a description, 2 sentences long, and covenantal words, 3 sentences of covenant words. Covenant is an interesting word also. I looked it up. In Merriam-Webster, covenant is defined as usually a solemn, formal, and binding agreement. As a verb, it is to pledge. So making a covenant is a solemn agreement where you pledge to do something. As I look at covenantal words in this and in the other value statements, I see action words. And Reverend Mandy alluded to that as well. In the covenantal words, you see action. Interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. With reverence for the great web of life, and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. Those are the descriptive words. We covenant to protect Earth and all beings from exploitation. We will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships. We can map these words to some of the principles and sources that are out there on the wall. The most direct mapping would be, in principles, to the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This value relates to that. Respect for the independent web of all existence of which we are a part. This value maps to that. In the sources, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Now, the first principle, the inherent worth of and dignity of every person, refers to the connectedness between all people. The second that I mentioned, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we're a part, refers to the connectedness of all humans and nature. And the source that I mentioned, we get from the inspirations of spiritual teachings that instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. And we can see this in societies that go back very far. You can map other principles and sources, but these are probably the most direct for this value. So let's shift gears here and get interactive. Let's explore the words and meanings that make up our value of interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. What does this mean to you? Anybody have any thoughts of what that means to you? That sentence in this value, we honor the interdependent web of all existence. Bob? If you want to state your name and pronouns, that would be good.
Yeah, my name's Robert, and to me this gets me thinking about some of the arrogance we have as human beings about thinking we have dominion over all of nature and we can exploit and ruin the environment on behalf of our profit and things like that. It's a pretty heavy-duty concept to think of the way we distort our interdependent relationship and think of it as a one-way exploitation kind of thing. I love my cheap gasoline and I love my plastic containers. There's so much that I should be doing that I don't.
That's a really good point. Really good point. Anyone else? Anyone want to expand on that?
Jenny, she, her. To me, this makes me think about the sacredness of all life. The honor, the interdependent web of all existence just makes me think of how we're all connected and like nature and between people, and there's something sacred in those connections.
Good, good. Other thoughts?
Randy, he, him, and I think that one part of it is kind of like what I do harmfully affects others, and that there's such a close connection between our actions, and just to own and feel that.
Thanks, Randy.
Hi, Denise Sieber, she, her. Whenever I hear the expression interdependent web, I think of like the universe is a big spider web, and there's no aggressive spiders. We're all equally on this, and so if I pull this way, it affects everything, whether it's nature or other people. So I just have this big spider web. Thank you.
Thank you. Do give us some, when you come up, your name and pronouns when you can. That's okay if you haven't, but if you do. That was great. That was great. It makes me think of the more we control nature, the more nature begins to control us. We take control of nature, and then suddenly nature is controlling us. You know, we build levees on a river to prevent flooding upriver, and then downriver we get a lot of flooding because we've constructed walls upriver. So when we control nature, nature has a way of coming back and controlling us, because we are all interdependent on each other and on nature and through nature. Barb.
Hi, Barbara, she, her. When I look at this, the word that jumps out at me is honor. And it forces me to look a little bit closer at my actions. What does honor mean for me? And that kind of brings out the importance of community as well, because I can't say, what does honor mean to me, until I start looking at everybody around me. And that will inform me of what it means to honor the interdependent web.
Thanks, Barb. Anyone else? Okay. So in this value, there are 2 lines of description and 3 lines of covenant. That was the first line of description. Second line of description is, as you can see up there, with reverence for the great web of life, and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. With reverence for the great web of life and with humility, we acknowledge our place in it. What does that mean to you? What kind of feelings do you get from that? What kind of thoughts do you get when you read it?
Randy, he, him, and I think that sometimes maybe it relates to the inherent worth and dignity in that we see our own and we appreciate that we have a part to play in this. And maybe to Barb's word of honor, we play it in an honorable fashion.
Thanks. Anyone else? Anyone else have a thought on that thought? Bob?
Robert again, he, him, they. Reverence gets me thinking about taking it seriously, what my place in the interdependent web, and not thinking it's a trivial thing.
Thanks, Bob.
Hi, Laura, she, her. I think this and both the sentence before this, humility in particular, remind me that I don't believe in a higher power like, God on the mountain, but it reminds me that there's something out there bigger than me, and that as much as I want to control everything in the universe, I may not actually have that control, turns out. And so the humility is just kind of like, you can do your part, but what you can do might also be limited. And it's a good exercise of not centering yourself too much.
Thank you. Good thought.
Good morning. My name's Maya, she, her. A little bit along the set lines of what Laura was saying, I feel like humility is very selflessness to me. And then the way that it's written with we acknowledge our place is very passive. It's not saying that we claim our stake in it and we're kind of that leader. It's more of like we're a part of it and we're just here, and it's more oneness than just like being the head or being on top of or leading it.
Thank you.
Kevin, he, him. Also, the word humility stood out to me. In particular, I found myself multiple times talking about the independence principle, not the interdependence principle. And I think tied in with humility is this idea that that's neither, well, I'll rephrase that. Our culture generally does not promote interdependence or humility. And that is what makes this such a challenging value to uphold. We have to think about like the Ubuntu idea that was brought up in service. How are we all together? And that makes us who we are.
Thank you much. Another thought.
Mary Ann, I also was thinking about the word humility, and it reminds me of ego and the polar opposite of the word ego. And it reminded me of a graphic that I've used a lot over the decades where ego is the man, like a human on top of the rest of our environment and the rest of the animals on the planet. And eco is we're a part of it. And humility is removing ego. And I think that we need a lot more of that in our culture. And just like you were saying, it's very, we're very independent. And it's okay to want each other around and to be connected and to need each other. And I think that we need to make that more and more and more. And I think this is good for that, to help us remind us that we need and should want to be with each other and to help each other. And that chain, we're a part of a chain that needs all the links in order to keep going.
Thank you. Another thought?
Hi, I'm Kathy, she, her. There's been a lot of comments on humility and yeah. I wanted to talk about reverence. Yeah. So when I thought of that word, the other word that came to mind immediately was awe and awesome. And so, and we see this in science, like everything, it's related to the web. That things are so interconnected, and we see when they overspray pesticides and they kill pollinators, and then how that ripples through the food chain to the things living in the oceans, and how everything is so connected. It just, that helps me to feel like we're human, but there's all of this around us, how the trees communicate through the roots to talk to each other so that they know to, protect themselves from a pest. I mean, that stuff is so awe-inspiring and part of that web that helps me to feel that humility and to make decisions myself to have less of a negative impact on the web. So.
Thank you. Other thoughts? There's a lot of thoughts on that one. That was good. Thank you. And I could say one thing about what you just said, which is the world did not suddenly drop down and exist this morning the way it exists. We're in the process of evolutionary change, and we are here because of what came before. So let's not perhaps knock down those supports. So the next section to talk about begins the covenantal lines. There are three words of covenantal lines, and I'd like to say one thing about each one. They're action lines. The first covenantal line in this value is, we covenant to protect the earth and all beings from exploitation. Protect is an action word. It's not passive, it's active. So what kind of thoughts do we have on protecting the earth, and who are these beings that we're protecting from exploitation? What does that include? What comes to mind when you think about that? What kind of feelings do you have about protecting the earth and all beings from exploitation?
I'm Sarah, she, her. I feel like when I look at this that it's a big promise and it's a little bit daunting, because I feel like it's a good call to action to take more actions to prevent climate control, use less plastic, do things like that, but also protecting all beings from exploitation, I feel like, is a challenge to consume responsibly, and that can be very challenging when you're making choices that have, that are coming from supply chains that we don't have much control over. So it really makes me think about making careful choices as a consumer, and yeah, there's a lot more to it, but that's just one of the things that.
Making small changes in the big picture. Any other thoughts on that? I see one. Your name and your pronoun.
Okay. My name is Alyssa Verson, she, her. And I think this is a really this can be a really challenging covenant to fulfill, because I think there is, like you were talking about being as a consumer, I think there is a privilege in being able to make choices as a consumer, because there is, there is a financial impact in making sustainable consumer decisions. And so I think that to me is, sometimes there's not equity in people's ability to fulfill this this covenant. So I think that's a challenge, and that's something that we can improve upon as a community.
So hard choices to make, pros and cons to live with.
This is Randy, he, him, and I guess maybe the flip side of exploitation would be judicious use of the earth and how we think about the, the seventh generation principle and how we can do things for the long run, knowing that we still use the earth, but to use it in a respectful and sustaining way. So,
thanks, Randy. Any more thoughts, Bob?
Hi, Robert again. This reminds me of a ritual that I was part of, and my wife reminded me that she was part of it at a retreat at our church a number of years ago, called the Council of All Beings. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but basically you get a group of people together and they think about what part of nature or what animal or insect or plant they feel called to represent. And for example, if I was called to be a deer, I would make a mask with the face of a deer and then get up to the microphone and speak on behalf of all the deer and talk about the poisoning of the environment and the chemicals in the environment and the way that my life as an element of the independent web is adversely affected by the way humanity is exploiting the earth and poisoning the earth with so many chemicals and things like that. It's a very powerful ritual, and it got me thinking about mindfulness and the ritual of being mindful about what we're consuming, what we're eating, and as a community taking action, because I feel so powerless as an individual, but as a community, maybe we can do something.
Thanks, Bob.
Kevin again, he, him. Piggybacking off of Robert's statement there, I think often we fall into the trap of what can I do as an individual? Can I stop using plastic bags? Can I stop using, plastic drinking straws? And it isn't. Like that's not what's going to save the world. We need collective action. We need activism to change what is being offered. We can't, the entire world cannot be saved by our own individual choices. It has to be systemic change, right? We can't have people who live in food deserts where they can't get fresh produce and are forced to live on processed trash, right? That shouldn't be the way that society feeds itself, and that we need to work towards a better future and a better system that fights against exploitation in all forms.
Thanks for that thought. Anyone else to build on that, think about it, add to it? I think of, when I hear you talk, I think of Margaret Mead, who said, when somebody tells you that one person can't change the world, don't believe them. Because it always starts with one person, and it always starts with us. I also think of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. If I am 90% good and 10% small sin, I'm still doing my part. And if I can play a small part in a big picture, then I'm showing up and doing my part too. And if enough people do that, then we make social change. Robert Kennedy once said a long time ago when he was running for president, he said, you know, in order to make social change in society, not one person makes that social change, but every person who throws a stone into a calm pond makes a little ripple. And if you get enough people throwing stones into that pond, you get a lot of little ripples that build into a large ripple and make a change. So we all do our part, all we can. The next sentence in this value is, we will create, and this again is a covenant sentence, we will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality and justice. And I see create as an action word. There are others, but I see that as the very first action word in this sentence. What do you think is meant by mutuality? How do we create and nurture sustainable relationships that build to mutuality and justice? And I'll give you a definition of mutuality. Again, Steve has provided me with the definition of mutuality. I appreciate that. Mutuality, a behavior in which two or more people or groups feel the same emotion or do the same thing for each other, respond to each other, take each other into account. How do you think we can do that? I think of, while you're thinking about that, I think of some science which has won some respect, that argues that the ability, human ability of cooperation and altruism has contributed to the evolution of the human species, to make us who we are, the thinking people, the thinking machines that we are, that insects are not. So cooperation and altruism has been good for us, and it builds us, and it helps us as a society and as a species. A thought that I have when I read this.
Robert again. This gets me thinking about our tendency toward tribalism and saying we're going to do stuff for our benefit, and the other people there are sort of the opposition and the enemy, and let's not pay much attention to them and their needs. And so that mutuality sort of is a call to be humble about, I know all the answers, or my group is the worthy group, and that other group, don't worry about them so much. So it's a humbling experience to think about that equality, so to speak.
Thanks, Bob. Randy?
I'll build on what Robert said, in that maybe this tendency to other people comes from our own hurt self, and that maybe our first level of nurturing and care and respect is for ourselves. And maybe that's the depth of the inherent worth and dignity, and that's sometimes forgotten, that we look to how can we be more just out there. And I'm saying a plug for meditation group tomorrow night, because the Dharma talk that we have is really about that, and or the talk that we're going to listen to.
Thanks, Randy.
Mary, she, her, hers. I will build on that a little bit by saying that I think that nurturing a sustainable relationship with self is ignored by us dissing ourselves and or the ego maniac. It's the two extremes. So we're either putting ourselves down or thinking we're better than everybody, everything else, and ours is the right way. And so that nurturing a sustainable relationship is being, first of all, with ourselves, I think, is being willing to look deeper and see what's really good and positive about ourselves and what we need to really acknowledge that keeps this mutuality from happening with others in other relationships. And when we can really honestly do that, then the mutuality and respect for the others, humans and otherwise, naturally flows. And I think we get too involved in what we have to do out there, which has to be done. But if we don't take care of the inner, actually in the talk tomorrow, it's called Inner and Outer Democracy. If we don't take care of the inner, then we keep having a lot of fits and starts with the outer.
Thank you.
Sarah Sheeher, just a couple words that come to mind when I'm thinking about mutuality are just empathy and active listening. I feel like those two things are kind of critical for seeing, you know, the divine in someone else and having that relationship of mutuality, not one where it's completely one-sided. And also just building off of what Randy and Mary were saying, I think having the kindness towards yourself is critical. I can attest to that because I came to this church feeling very isolated, so having a challenge to create and nurture relationships requires that I do some work on myself, that I believe I have something to contribute, and you know, you have to come from there to even be willing to start connecting with people. So anyway.
Thanks, Sarah.
Hi, Suzanne, she, her. I agree with what everyone said, and I think for us to have mutuality, and like when I think about here, our political divide, we're so divided now, people can't seem to come together, and I think the way that we could make that happen, where we could come together, is by engaging with these people and identifying shared values that we have on both sides, because there are shared values, and the only way that we're going to bridge the gap and get there is to try to identify the shared values to bring people together. And there have been times when we have been able to do that in the past, and I think we need to do it again.
Thank you. Any other thoughts to build on that or add to it? I'll add one. I'd like to build on what Randy said in one of the things that he said. He mentioned tribalism, and I have thoughts of just my own thoughts about the tribes that we belong to, and tribalism that is a part of us. I am a member of several tribes. I come from Irishmen who migrated here. I am a straight tribe, a white tribe, a man tribe. I am a Chicagoland tribe. I have a lot of tribes that I belong to. Some are more important to me than others. But one of the things I learned, and one of the few things I remember that I learned in my college theology class, is that there are parts of us that we have to dig deep to understand and root out, parts that will pop out in unexpected times if we don't think about it, if we don't have some degree of introspection into who we are, and maybe parts of us that, well, we haven't jumped out, found their moment yet. It requires thought, it requires being an adult, it requires maturing, and sometimes it requires changing. And that came from the actual experience of the person who was talking. When something jumped out at him, a professor of theology that he never expected to be there, and that was the lesson for the day. So the next item on the list will be, if I haven't lost my place entirely, will be the last sentence, a covenant sentence of this value. We will work together. We will work to repair harm and damaged relationships. That is the last covenant value. I see an action word in there, and that action word is work. And as you think about what you would like to say or what you think about that, I will tell you that this is probably the hardest thing that I have on here for me, to work to repair damaged relationships and repair harm. Doesn't happen that often, but it happens sometimes, and it's hard to work. It's hard to work through it. Working with people that you feel you've harmed, or people who have harmed you, and how you want to deal with that and with them. How far you want to carry that baggage, how much anger you want to carry. How easy or hard is it to get rid of that baggage? Those are my thoughts on the sentence. Any other thoughts? Bob?
Seems like the last few months I've been doing quite a bit of reading about the harm part of it that I wasn't aware of. I was kind of naive, maybe. I was diagnosed recently, well, a few years ago with Parkinson's, and I've been reading up on potential causes of Parkinson's. And one of the main things that seems to be popping up in a lot of the research is the poisoning of our environment and the chemicals in our environment that create neurological damage to our bodies over time. And I was reading about the West Virginia, where the chemical companies there covered up the pollution of the environment in West Virginia in the name of profit and keeping a lid on the way the environment there got poisoned so that property values wouldn't be damaged, and so that the profits of the chemical companies wouldn't be damaged. And then I just read something about the Farm Bureau has been encouraging farmers to take the solid waste from water treatment plants and use them as fertilizers in our crops. And then they're finding out that there's thousands of unregulated damaging chemicals in the solid waste of water treatment plants. And so we're poisoning our food supply. Holy smokes. There's all this stuff going on under the radar in the name of profit, in the name of let's keep a lid on this bad news so property values aren't damaged. It's like there's this corrupting process or value system that working on repairing harm means confronting some very, very uncomfortable corrupting influences in the way our society runs. And I feel like I've been naive.
Thanks, Bob. Other thoughts on this?
Sorry to depress everybody.
Well, it's not depressing. Unintended consequences.
I kind of have think of it more on although it can be thought of on the macro level for sure. When I read it, I think about it on the micro level, and I think about, anyway, it reminds me, it's one of those steps in the 12-step program, I believe, is working to repair relationships or people you may have harmed or hurt by your behavior, and then also, working to either forgive others. I do have a little resistance to this because I do think there are some relationships that are just too toxic to be saved, and maybe that you still work on repairing it by working on yourself, perhaps. So I struggle a little bit with that piece.
That's a hard piece.
I kind of want to tie together something you said and something you said, because you were talking about how we have to kind of sit in the discomfort of it. And I think that on a global and individual level, that's probably true, because the privileges we have in DuPage County are built on the oppression of other people on a macro level. on a micro level, I think when we work to repair harm and relationships and things like that, it can't be a one-sided thing. It can't just be one person saying, I want to repair this harm. Even the wronged person has to say, I want to repair this harm. And it has to come from both sides working together and being committed to that. And I think it's really easy to say, that person wronged me and they are bad and I'm not going to deal with them anymore. And if we want to build community, we have to have a more mature understanding of relationships and say, that person wronged me and they need to make amends, and then I need to forgive them. And there are things I think that are too big or too complicated to forgive, but like, I think by coming and having both parties do that, we can do this, but you can't do it if it's only one party who's taking that action.
I just want to thank my wife inadvertently for plugging next week's Committee on Shared Ministry service, where we are going to specifically be talking about right relations and maintaining our covenant and our community through, repairing harm, repairing damaged relationships, and coming together as a community. I didn't even ask her to do that.
Other thoughts, building on anybody else's thoughts? I have one more thought about repairing harm and damaged relationships, and that is and that builds actually a little bit on Sarah's comments when I thought of it. It's repairing harm to ourselves. We carry baggage with us, we carry anger with us, and the anger hurts us more than it does whoever we're angry at. And that's an easy thing to say because I've been angry at people and then, have a hard time putting it down in my life sometimes. But repairing harm to ourselves, or at least minimizing it, putting it in a box or not putting it in a box and putting it away, but thinking through it and reducing the harm that we do ourselves by carrying the anger and carrying the baggage to the extent that we can. So, if nobody else has anything to say about this final sentence, then we have dissected interdependence. And I'll ask you if anybody has any overall feelings about what we've talked about, the discussion today. What do you think about it? Do you think it was worthwhile? Thoughts? Don't have to have any.
At first I was kind of upset of replacing the 7 principles and the sources, because that's one of the things that drew me to Unitarian Universalism. But what I'm realizing about this new format is that it's very action-oriented in the covenant part of it. So it gets beyond just thinking about what our values are, but thinking about what we're going to do about it. So I really like the covenant part of it.
Very good point. Start with the description, end with the covenant and the action. Any other thoughts? If there are not, well then I guess we're done with this section. And I thank you all for coming, and for everybody who's commented, and just for everybody who's come to listen and participate, because that's why we're all here, is to be part of a community, in this community. We've chosen this community, and thank you for coming and being a part of this. And we're done.
Thank you, Gerry.